Today we are going to take the humble sweet potato and turn it into vodka. How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I'm Jesse, this is Still It, and today we are making sweet potato vodka, or, seeing as I'm a Kiwi and living in New Zealand, Kumera vodka. That's what we call these things. About 2 years ago, I made vodka out of potatoes, and it ended up being the most popular video on this channel. It's this one here. Therell be a link in the description down below if you want to check it out. But ever since then, I have wanted to do pretty much the same thing with Kumera. And today's the day. And I guess the obvious question to answer is going to be, is Kumera / sweet potato better than, just standard potato when it comes to making vodka? Today I'm going to be using 13 kilograms of Kumera or sweet potato, and that is this in freedom units, and it is going to make roughly 2 liters of vodka at 40% ABV. The first step is to break the Kumera down. Now you could just use a knife and cut it up. Ideally, I'd like a little bit more surface area, smaller bits than that. You could use a food processor, but your significant other may have choice words with you about that. I ended up deciding to choose life and use a grater. And yeah, it took a long ass time, but I used to work in restaurants a bunch, so this sort of thing's just kind of normal for me. Now apparently, sweet potato or Kumera has a relatively high amount of enzymes in it, and I've heard that you can use Kumera to mash itself, to convert the starches in Kumera into sugars using the enzymes that are in the Kumera. I'm going to have a little play with it and see what happens. At the end of that, I'm going to give you my thoughts on how I would suggest actually doing it. So the grated Kumera goes into just enough water to submerge it, and we're going to bring the temperature of that water up to 62 degrees Celsius, which is this in Fahrenheit. The reason I'm going to that temperature first is that is sort of the beginning, the very bottom end of the window where the alpha amylase is going to start being active, and I'm going to hold it there for 1 hour. And at the end of 1 hour, pretty much nothing's changed. The Kumera, the sweet potato, looks exactly the same as it did when it went in. Disappointing. So let's bump the temperature up to 65 degrees Celsius and hold it for another hour. After an hour, the appearance of the sweet potato now is actually starting to change. It is starting to loosen up a little bit, but it's still very brittle and completely opaque. So I don't think we're where we want to be, but let's do a couple of tests to find out. First of all, let's do a starch test, which reveals that there is almost no starch in the liquid. Odd. So let's take a gravity reading. Maybe we have converted all the starch already. 1.015. That is pathetic. But do you like my new toy? That's pretty cool, eh? This video is actually sponsored by Easydents, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But for now, if you like the look of the thing and you want to find out some more information about it, there's a link in the description down below. So given that there is no starch in the liquid and there is also very little sugar in the liquid, I think what's happening here is that the enzymes have converted perhaps a little bit of starch that was in the liquid, but mostly we just haven't released the starch from the Kumera shavings yet. The starch hasn't been gelatinized. So let's bump the temperature up to 69 degrees Celsius, which is starting to get near the top of the window where the alpha amylase will be active, sort of before it starts to denature itself, and we'll hold it there for another hour. After waiting for another hour, let's take another gravity reading. 1017. That is better, but barely. So we could just keep messing around and trying little incremental steps all the way up. But like I said, we are getting to the very tippy top of that kind of window where the enzymes that are in the Kumera are actually going to work. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to blast this up to 92 degrees Celsius, that in Fahrenheit, and add in some high temperature alpha amylase that come in a packet, and this stuff has no problem at all operating at 92. So we'll get it up to 92 degrees Celsius and let it sit for another hour. Now we are finally seeing solid changes in the Kumera. It's getting to be very pliable, it's getting to be soft, sort of slightly mushy, and probably most importantly, it's going translucent, almost transparent, which is a fairly good sign that most of the starch has been used, and we're left with essentially fiber. But most importantly, the Easydents tells us that we now have a gravity of 1.038. Not huge, but respectable enough to ferment. So if I was actually going to do this myself, what would I do? To be honest, I would boil the snot out of the Kumera to make sure I got every little bit of starch out of it to convert into sugar. But there was some pushback on that in the original potato vodka, and kind of rightly so, because that creates a really thick, gooey mess that is kind of hard to deal with if you're at home with very basic equipment. And that's why in this video, I decided to grate the Kumera and only heat it to 92 degrees Celsius and not just boil it forever. You manage to extract a bunch of the starch and the sugar out of the Kumera, but you still have structure to it so you can strain it. So what am I recommending? Grate it or food processor it down into fine little bits, bang the temperature up to 92 degrees Celsius, throw in some high temperature alpha amylase and let it mash for an hour and a half. I think that's a pretty good compromise. So now it's time to get all the chunky stuff out so we can ferment nice clear liquid, which is, like I said earlier, easier to deal with basic equipment. A brew in a bag will do the job. Heck, a pillowcase will get the job done quite nicely. And I find that this fruit press here is absolutely wonderful. But all of that clear liquid goes into the fermenter and we pitch our yeast. I today am using 1.5 tablespoons of an M1 whiskey yeast because I think the slightly more fruity esters are going to play quite nicely. But if you want to, you could just use baker's yeast. 5 days later, all signs of fermentation have dropped off, and the Easydents confirms that it has fermented out down to a gravity of 1. So it's time to distill the stuff. So all of the wash goes into the still, and I'm just going to run this as a simple pot still first for a stripping run. So the idea is we get the still up to temperature. I'm not worrying about cuts. I'm not worrying about any of the flavors. All I'm worrying about is cutting down the volume a little bit. Because the wash was quite a low ABV, we don't have a whole lot of just bulk alcohol to deal with here. I'm going to run the still fairly thrifty-like. And what I mean by that is I'm going to keep running the still until the drips coming off the end are down below 5% ABV. Then all of the low wines we collected from the stripping run can go back into the still for the spirit run. This is a reflux still specifically designed to help get a higher ABV during distillation. There'll be a link in the description down below if you want to learn more about reflux stills. So we're up and running with distillation, which is excellent. Things are going smoothly. I've taken quote-unquote 4 shots. No use for those. We can get rid of that. Heads. I took exactly this much heads. I haven't measured it. I'm sorry. You can guesstimate it, but it is entirely by taste. But if you watched the video I put out recently, 13 distilling tips from the pros in America, I think it was called. I'll put a link down below. One of them was judging heads based on like a sweet infant spilly baby spew smell or a fresh cardboard smell. And yeah, after hearing that and talking about it, definitely makes it a little bit easier for me to pinpoint things. So check that video out if you're interested. Anyway, I can put those back into my next run of vodka that I'm making. But now I'm collecting hearts, and there is definitely a large difference between this and the potato vodka that I made a long time ago. So keen to get this done, proofed down, and taste it for you guys. In case you haven't seen the T500 before, this is a very simple still, easy to run for a beginner. The good thing is that it gives you less options on how to run things. The bad thing is that it gives you less options on how to run things. I'm running it pretty much stock standard. The only difference is that I have a power controller hooked up, and I found the correct balance between coolant water and power to be right at around 85% for this run. That's where it's running nicely, with much more water going through the still than these guys would suggest. I'm just trying to keep that reflux ratio, the amount of reflux going back down the column, relatively high, push the ABV up a little bit compared to what it would be. Speaking of which, it's time to tell you a little bit more about the sponsor of today's show, Easydents by Anton Paar. Anton Paar are the gold standard in tools that measure gravity and proof for commercial distilleries, but they also make this little thing here, which is the Easydents that's been popping up all throughout this video. The Easydents is specifically for the home distiller or the home brewer that appreciates accuracy, consistency, and convenience in the tools they use. Using the Brewmeister app will allow you to test for gravity, just like a refractometer with tiny little samples. But unlike a refractometer, you can use the Easydents to measure final gravity at the end of fermentation without having to know original gravity and use formulas. If you use the Proofmeister app, you can use the Easydents to check the proof of an alcohol. Perfect for checking the ABV at a certain time during the run coming off a still, or obviously for proofing, which is how I'm about to use it. Near instant readings, tiny sample sizes, and the ability to store the test results that you get under batches within the intuitive apps just make this thing an absolute no-brainer. So use the code STILLIT10 to get 10% off at easydents.com when you get your new awesome piece of kit. If you didn't catch what happened in that little montage, I collected and kept all the hearts that came off the still, popped them into a container, used a calculator from chasethecraft.com to decide how much water to put into it, proofed it down to 40% ABV, and bottled it. This is what we have finished here. So I guess let me pour a little of this so we can taste it. Oh, by the way, guys, the tails, all I really found in the tails was it started to get a little bit astringent. That's all that popped up. No wet dog, no nastiness. I cut it for astringency. Let me taste this first and then we can compare it to the potato vodka. It's really smooth. Way smoother than any of the sugar wash things I've made before. There's just something to not using table sugar. It's just the way it is. I don't know. Okay, so here we go. There is definitely flavor coming in this. And that T500 only got this up to 92% ABV. So with the bigger still, we could have got it up to more like 95%. That would have cleaned it up a little bit and knocked the flavor down a bit. But the people out there that tell you that vodka tastes like nothing, I don't agree with you, man. There's always some flavor that comes through from the original product. And this, funnily enough, tastes like sweet potato. It's actually not dissimilar to tequila. It's not the same, but it's kind of similar. That herbaceous smell of raw cut sweet potato. It's that, but without the kind of weird metallic taste that you can sometimes get from raw vegetables like that. It's really good. It's tasty. It's gonna 100% depend on whether or not you like Kumera. But how does it compare to the potato vodka? First, I need to say huge thank you to the Patreons. Thank you so much, Patreons, for being the people that support me in, day out. I thoroughly appreciate it. And by the way, I decided to double pot still a small sample of the Kumera wash. It's not gonna fit into this video. Patreons, I'll put that up separately for you. All right, comparing this to potato vodka. First of all, this is a much better product, I think simply because I'm better at what I do now, and two, I committed to actually making this vodka, unlike what I did with the potato vodka. Flavor-wise, would you rather a earthy, potatoey sort of vodka, or would you rather a slightly sweet, herbaceous, raw Kumera, raw sweet potato, almost tequila-like vodka? That's up to you. I can't tell you one way or the other. But I think the Kumera is going to be slightly easier to work with, apples compared to apples, just because when you do cook it to the same doneness as potato tends to go to smush. There's nothing to it, whereas Kumera is a little bit more fibrous, and it's going to hold together a little bit better in terms of squeezings. If you're just going to boil the snot out of it and then distill on vegetable, I don't think there's going to be any difference between the two. It depends what flavor you like. For me, right now, I'd go with the sweet potato vodka. This is unlike anything I've ever had before, and it's actually really damn good. So cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time.